I'm Vandana Viday. Thanks so much for having me today. So today we are going to speak about the Mediterranean diet. And just for logistics, let me tell you what I'm going to talk about. So first I'm going to talk about the history of the Mediterranean diet, and then what the health benefits are. There's got to be some health benefits, although I wouldn't be here speaking about it, but I'm going to talk about the health benefits. And then I'm going to go into some detail about the different components, so the different food groups. And fortunately, you all have this lovely lunch to sort of try some of the elements of the Mediterranean diet. And then at the end, I'm going to have a question and answer session. But this is very informal. So if you have any questions, please stop me and I'll bring the mic over and we can go over those questions if you have a burning desire to know something right then. Okay? So first, let's talk about the history of the Mediterranean diet. Obviously, it started in the Mediterranean, but how did it start in this country? How did we learn about it? So actually, I call Dr. Ancel Keys sort of the father of the Mediterranean diet in the United States, because he did this landmark study. This was after World War II. So this was when the GIs were coming back from Germany and Japan. So there was this landmark study called the 7-country study, and it was following a total of 13,000 men. It was middle-aged men, no females in this group, and followed them for a number of years, and to find out what was the incidence of heart disease and what did people die from. The different countries that were studied, Italy, Greece, Finland, Yugoslavia, of course the United States, and Japan. And surprisingly, what was found out is that actually the United States, we would think because we're one of the wealthiest countries, would have a high standard of living, whereas in war-torn Europe that they wouldn't have a lot of food and things. But actually what it turned out is that the Greeks were the healthiest as far as cardiovascular disease went. So they had the least amount of cardiovascular disease, heart disease, and stroke. And Dr. Ancel Keys and his associates, and one of his, just sort of medical trivia, one of his associates on this landmark study was Dr. Paul Dudley White, who later went on to be President Eisenhower's personal heart doctor. So he was, really pretty well known in this country. So they theorized that, well, why was there such a low incidence of heart disease among the Greek population, especially on the island of Crete? So what they found on the island of Crete is actually the men here were eating up to 7 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables. So they theorized, well, it must be the diet, so it's a Mediterranean diet. So let's think back at that time. So this was right after World War II. Of course, you remember what happened is that soldiers went overseas to fight, and so the women who were living in the United States, they went to the factories to work, and instead of staying at home and cooking meals, they wanted convenience food. So that's when we started having like cans of Spam and cans of cream of mushroom soup, right? Some of you remember all of those things. So I was born, actually, this is a little aside, I was born in India and I moved here when I was 5. And, I thought that the reason, this is of course when I was young, I thought that the reason that my mom wanted to move to the United States is so that she could have a limitless supply of cream of mushroom soup. Because we had like 20 cans, and then Bisquick, and then I grew up in Wisconsin, so of course we had lots of Cheese Whiz. And, I think that my mom's would have thought she died and went to heaven if she could make a casserole out of these 3 items. So Bisquick, I don't even know what's in Bisquick, but if she had Bisquick and cream of mushroom soup and Cheese Whiz, in case like the Avon lady came, or if the welcome wagon came, she'd be prepared. But now we know that that's probably not the most healthy way of eating. But this is what we were eating right after World War II. So we wanted convenience, and that has continued. The only difference between then and now is, can anybody guess? What's the difference between now and then, other than the food items? fast food, so that's a big part of it. So of course, fast food was just getting started here, and of course in Europe there wasn't McDonald's and those kinds of things. The other thing is our portion sizes. So our portion sizes have grown astronomically since then, especially since the 1970s. But the percentage, so this is a little hard concept to describe, but I want you to think about it. So our goal in a healthy diet, you've probably all heard we should all be having less than 30% of calories from fat, right? Has everybody heard of that, the Healthy People Initiative? So, you know, this came out in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and now today we actually do have less than 30% of calories from fat, but the only reason that is because we've increased our caloric intake. So it's not really for a good reason. So, and in many diets, we have 65% or more calories from fat. So, you know, the dogma in the medical community has always been low-fat, low-cholesterol diets. Especially if you have heart disease or you want to lose weight, that's sort of the diet that's been recommended. So let's go back to the Mediterranean diet because, of course, the men on the island of Crete had a very low incidence of cardiovascular disease. But yet the Mediterranean diet is actually known as a moderate fat diet, meaning it has more than 30% of calories from fat. So how does that make any sense? Should we be having... Good fat, right. So I heard good fat. So the secret really is in the type of fat that we have in the Mediterranean diet. So in the Mediterranean diet, most of the fat or the oils that are used are monounsaturated oils like olive oil and polyunsaturated oils like canola oil, soybean oil, peanut oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil. So that's really what the key. You still have to remember it is fat and it is calories, so you still want to have a limited amount. But if you're going to cook, that's the olive oil to cook in. Now, so then what we did was in the last 20 years, we've had a lot of studies that have compared this low-fat, low-cholesterol diet, sort of our, you know, the medical dogma of how we should be eating to be healthy and how we should be eating if we want to lose weight. And so there's comparisons between the Mediterranean diet and the low-fat, low-cholesterol diet, the sort of the Step 1 American Heart Association diet. And recently, actually just this month in the American Journal of Medicine, there was a study that actually combined a number of other studies called meta-analysis when you combine different studies, and so you get a much higher number of patients. And so there was thousands of patients who were combined, comparing the American Heart Association diet versus the Mediterranean diet. And what we found is that actually people in the Mediterranean diet had a much lower incidence of heart disease, stroke, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's disease. Also cancer and cancer mortality. So really interesting that even though there's more fat, there's still a lower incidence of these illnesses that we all want to try to get rid of in our everyday lives. Sorry, I'm going to let her answer the phone. You got it? Okay. All right, so is everybody following along so far? Okay. The Mediterranean diet has also been studied in actually a total of 1.5 million people. This is men and women, since most of the people here are women and interested in this diet. 1.5 million people have been studied. And again, we have decreased risk of death from heart disease, cancer, cancer mortality, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. What I haven't said is weight loss, right? Most of you are interested in weight loss. Anybody interested in weight loss? Okay, right, sure. So there aren't actually a lot of studies comparing different weight loss diets, especially the Mediterranean diet, but what has been seen is that people who follow the traditional Mediterranean diet, and I'll go over that in a minute, actually are leaner. So you can sort of assume that it's a healthy way and also a way to limit your calorie intake. Okay, so what are the essentials of the Mediterranean diet? We've already spoken about the fat, right? We talked about olive oil, which is a big component. And what you really want is just low amounts of saturated fats, which is, again, what the Step 1 American Heart Association diet is. So instead of butter, right, you would, instead of putting butter on bread, because there are a lot of grains in the Mediterranean diet, it's replaced by healthy oils like olive oil and the other kinds of oils that I spoke about. Okay, now, Mediterranean diet is primarily a plant-based diet. So we have lots of fruits and vegetables. And again, what was found on the island of Crete is up to 10 fruits and vegetables. Remember, here we talk about our 5 a day. So we're not even, less than 40% of people in this country are even achieving the 5 a day. So we want to have actually 10 fruits and vegetables, if we can, in our diet. And then also whole grains, seeds, nuts, legumes, and fish. And we'll talk about fish. So let's start first, though, with the fruits. Again, 4 all the way to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables, and at least 4 of those should be fruits. What are the healthiest fruits? Can anybody think of? I know you've done some research. Berries, right. Strawberries. Okay, so strawberries is the consensus here. Strawberries are very high in antioxidants, which can help prevent atherosclerosis and heart disease and cancer. Actually, the highest phytochemical or antioxidant content is actually in black currants, which is hard in this country to get. Blackberries, so the red berries are actually really important. Blueberries, we always hear about that. But actually the purple berries are the ones that are actually really, really high levels of antioxidants. So I sort of say that purple is the new green because that's the kinds of berries that we want to have in our diet. Raspberries, and especially black raspberries, are very high in antioxidants. And then go ahead.
What constitutes a serving?
I'm sorry?
What is a serving?
Okay, so a serving is usually half a cup, which you can think of as a tennis ball. So that's the size. 10 of those, if you want to have them all in fruit. Right, but usually if you aim for 4 fruits a day, so 4 tennis ball sizes, a small apple or a small orange, that's sort of what a serving size is. One of the other fruits that I was going to mention is cherries. So cherries have a lot of antioxidants, and we believe that it actually will help prevent diabetes or stabilize your blood sugar, because cherries are digested so slowly that you don't get this spike of sugar after eating a meal. And you'll see this as a recurrent theme when I talk about a lot of items do that, and those are all beneficial. All right, so another important fruit, which is also red, but it's red for a different reason than strawberries. This is tomatoes, which are red because of the antioxidant lycopene. So lycopene is an antioxidant that's very similar but not the same as vitamin A. And the important thing about tomatoes is that they should be somehow, I don't want to say processed, but they should either be juiced or made into sauce, or even, believe it or not, tomato ketchup has a fair amount of lycopene. Just because you have to sort of open up the tomatoes, and if you cook them with oil, because it's what's called a fat-soluble vitamin, so if you cook them with oil, that will make the lycopene even easier to absorb. So the sun-dried tomatoes that you had today with the fish is a good example of that. And I'm sorry, did you have a question? You said something about sun-dried tomatoes? No, okay.
Are they better when you cooked or raw?
Cooked. Yeah, so actually cooking is better, whereas other fruits and vegetables are better raw, but actually tomatoes are better cooked. And another one, and again, if you have just a tiny bit of oil, okay, so I don't mean like, sort of drenched in butter, but a little bit of oil will help the absorption of lycopene.
What do you think of bananas?
I'm sorry?
What do you think of bananas?
Well, bananas are, they are a good fruit. They have a fair. They are a good source of potassium, which will help lower your blood pressure. The only thing with bananas is they have a fair amount of sugar, but they're still good sort of snacks to have instead of, say, processed food. But some of and so I'm not trying to say that they're not healthy, because I think they are, especially if you need to have potassium or you're trying to monitor your blood pressure. I think there's some other fruits and vegetables, I think, that are sort of superfruits, which, because they have sort of really high levels of antioxidants. And one of them is pumpkins. So pumpkins and sweet potatoes are really, really healthy. And again, they have a fair amount of vitamin A. And they, again, are better when you cook them with just a tiny bit of oil, so the vitamin A is absorbed. And again, if you cook them, it's actually a better way of absorbing all the nutrients. The other nice thing about pumpkins and sweet potatoes, and also bananas, is that they have a fair amount of fiber. So that's really helpful. One other thing I wanted to mention, another fruit, so lemon, and I think that you've had lemon as part of this meal. So lemon is, and all citrus actually has a fair amount of vitamin C, and that helps the absorption of any iron that is in the meal. So you always want to have it with a meal because it'll help the absorption of iron. But there's actually other fruits or vegetables that have a higher level of vitamin C than the classic oranges and lemons that we think about. Can anybody think what that might be? Celery doesn't have it has a lot of fiber, so celery is actually very helpful for that reason. And I'm sorry? Eggplant has a lot of fiber, and actually I think because of its purple, it does have a lot of antioxidants. Avocados have modest unsaturated fats, so they're really, really healthy. What I was actually thinking about is peppers. So any kind of peppers, especially the orange, red, and yellow peppers, but even the green peppers, and even hot peppers. So they have more vitamin C even than oranges and lemons. Sure.
Relating to the
Shh. Let's listen up.
consumption of fruit, is that best taken with other food, or is it better taken by itself? In other words, is it better to have, apples in your salad, or just eat an apple?
Oh, okay. Actually, a lot of it's just better to get it as food. Okay. Shh. So the question was, do you want to have just an apple, or should you cut it up and put it in, say, a salad or in a meal? It's better actually to get it as food, whether you eat it alone or some people don't like just a regular old apple. So if it's better for you to have it combined with other things, then that's the way to have it. The issue with apples is you want to always make sure that you have the peels, so the skin of the apples, because that's where most of the nutrients are. So, but things like tomatoes, you actually do want to combine with other things, because then it increases the lycopene content. Go ahead.
Organic versus buying it, is that really important if you use the skin?
Sure. I think, for example, bananas that we talked about are not as important to get organic because you're going to remove the peel. But there's certain things like strawberries, which I find really hard to find organic strawberries, but there's a lot of pesticides when strawberries are grown. So there's certain kinds of things like peaches, potatoes. Those are all things that if you can, try to get organic. Okay. Anybody else? Sure.
Dried fruit.
Dried fruit is fine, like dates is a big part of the Mediterranean diet, as long as you don't have sugar added, okay? But for example, with raisins, it's better to have grapes than to have raisins just because the sugar content is higher. Probably the same, as long as you don't have sugar added. A lot of these, it's just a practical matter. It's really hard in the winter to get a lot of these fruits and vegetables, so it's still better to be able to get them if they're dried, as long as you don't add a lot of sugar in addition. Okay? All right, so we've talked about peppers and vitamin C. So now let's move on to the vegetables. The classic vegetables that you think about as being super healthy or superfoods are the cruciferous vegetables. And cruciferous just means when you cut them up, they're shaped like a cross. So the classic one is broccoli, which should be cooked, and it doesn't have to be, sort of soggy cooked, but you do want to cook it because actually it increases the antioxidant properties. Other examples are cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and actually kale is considered a cruciferous vegetable. And these are all felt to be protective for different kinds of cancer, especially breast cancer and prostate cancer. Other sort of the classic things we think about being healthy is spinach and then greens, and this is a big part of the Mediterranean diet. So Swiss chard, mustard greens, spinach, broccoli rabi, all of those are good sources of iron, and they also have a fair amount of calcium, folic acid, and then fiber. Okay, so those are all the beneficial properties. So that sort of moves me on to a really, really important part of the Mediterranean diet, which is whole grains. Whole grains means simply that the outer portion of the grain has not been removed. And we kind of get a little bit confused with the terminology because, for example, whole wheat bread is not actually a whole grain, although it says whole wheat. But it's actually, it's been processed and it's made into flour, so it's no longer a whole grain. But it still has more fiber than, say, white bread. For example, the Mediterranean diet, they eat a lot of fresh bread, but it doesn't have a lot of the sugars and the fats that we have in the bread that we eat in this country. So again, whole grains is really important. What are some of the beneficial things? So you can think of when you eat a whole grain, say oatmeal, you're going to feel full longer, so people tend to eat less. And the way that it's processed in the body, it actually takes a lot more calories to process or digest whole grains. So you burn more calories as you digest this food. We also think that whole grains are super healthy for your colon. So they help prevent diverticulosis. I'm sure a lot of your doctors have said you have diverticulosis, and so you have to cut out the fat in your diet and increase the fiber. There's also, if you have a high whole grain diet, it also decreases the risk of colon cancer. And so that's really important. The only thing that I recommend with whole grains is slowly increase it in your diet. And you have to have lots and lots of water because otherwise you can get really constipated. So you want to slowly get used to it. And you want to have a combination of what's called soluble and insoluble fiber, which is a little bit confusing, but really any kind of whole grain is good for you. Okay? All right, so can anybody think of some examples of whole grain? We always think about oatmeal, right? Steel-cut oatmeal. Polenta, that's excellent. Sure. I'm sorry? Right, exactly. Quinoa is a really important one. There's cracked wheat, millet, barley, buckwheat. Okay, these are all whole grains that we should try to increase in our diet. And again, I talked about how certain food that's slowly digested doesn't cause that spike in your sugar after you eat, so it's got what we call a low glycemic index. And so the whole grains are something that will help stabilize your sugar. We also know that if you have lots of whole grain in your diet, that it lowers your cholesterol. And again, as I said, it's really good for the colon health.
Wheat berries.
Wheat berries, right, exactly.
You know, now there's I don't know how you buy oatmeal.
Uh-huh.
You can buy whole grains like that.
Okay, sure. And even if you were just to get the regular old, like, instant oatmeal, it still has a fair number of fiber. Go ahead.
I know corn is not part of the Mediterranean diet, but what about corn?
First of all, I think any fruit or vegetable, I'm not going to nitpick about whether you're going to eat bananas or you're going to have corn, because especially if you have it in season, they're fruits and vegetables and they're healthy for you. And if that's what you enjoy, then that's what you should eat. I sort of emphasize, just because people want to know, how can you get the most antioxidant for your money or whatever. So I talk about corn wouldn't be considered one of them because there's a fair amount of sugar in it. But I still think, it's better than, for example, if you were to get bagged popcorn. So, it doesn't have all the extra fats and sugars that you think about. Now, if you made your own popcorn, by the way, that would be pretty healthy as well, as long as you don't put a lot of butter and salt in it. Yep, sure.
What about the folks who had colon sections removed. Is a whole grain diet beneficial for that patient population?
You know, it depends on what the reason that the colon was removed. So right when you have the surgery, you know, they usually put you on what's called a low residue diet, which is not a lot because it can be very hard on the colon. But a lot of it is if you had, for example, if you had part of your colon removed for diverticulitis, then you do actually want to have a lot of fiber in your diet because that will prevent those little outpouchings from forming again. If it was because of colon cancer, again, we know the fiber is really good. Now, there's certain people with inflammatory bowel disease who don't tolerate fiber that well. They should have it, but they just don't tolerate it. But again, I think if you do it slowly, and the key really is having enough water. That's really important. People tolerate a lot better. So in general, most people, I recommend that they should have
What do you mean by a lot of water? How much?
you know, if you have like at least 8 to 10 of this size, you know, that's a little bit less than 8 ounces. But you want, most of us are lucky if we have 1 glass of water, or maybe 2 glasses of water. And the rest of what we have are things like sodas and juices. So really water is what you want to have. You do, but typically you would recommend more water than that. Okay? All right, so we talked about fiber, soluble, insoluble. 30 grams is what's recommended. So you can actually read the labels, like for example on the oatmeal, and find out how much fiber. Right, exactly.
Question?
Sure.
What about cereal that is unsweetened, like shredded wheat, cold cereals?
You know, you really stumped me because I don't know if shredded wheat is a whole grain. I think it is. If you don't have sugar in it and you don't have the frosted kind, then I think that's fine. I mean, anything that has fiber is good. It's just hard to find it. You have to really look on the label because a lot of times you'll see things that are kind of disguised. You know, they'll say, like in big label, no trans fat, and then on the back you'll see partially hydrogenated, or you'll see all kinds of carbohydrates and sugars and things that you can't even recognize. And so they're disguised in that way. If you go to restaurants, people don't have to label if there's any trans fat. So sometimes you don't know what it is that you're getting. Go ahead.
What about cream of wheat? Is that, is that full of fiber?
So cream of wheat is actually a processed fiber, but it has a lot of fiber. It's a whole grain, but it has a lot of fiber. So I would think that would be a good thing. You know, have something that you enjoy. I mean, if you can have that instead of like Cocoa Puffs, you know, I think that's a good thing, right? Right? Okay. I'm addressing that to my son. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the next subject. So another really, really important component, and has, again, this theme of high fiber, which is legumes and beans. So a lot more legumes and beans in the Mediterranean diet than we're used to having in the United States. The only disadvantage of beans is that it's not what we call a complete protein, which means it doesn't have all the essential amino acids. There's just a couple of amino acids that we need to get in our diet, and meat has all those essential, but you need to limit. We'll talk about that in a minute. You need to limit the amount of meat that you have. But in general, you know, beans are an excellent source of fiber and iron. So those are really important. One of the things that I recommend is if you're going to make your own beans, soak it and then discard the water several times, because that will give you less sort of digestive problems. And again, if you're going to start with this in your diet, slowly increase it, because I see people who like sort of go gung-ho and, you know, they're having like 10 servings and then the next day they've gone back to, you know, their Cocoa Puffs or whatever. So, okay, so nuts. Nuts is another really, really important part of the Mediterranean diet. And again, it has a lot of fiber. They also have antioxidants and omega-3 fatty acids. So this is what really sort of makes this type of fat, the omega-3 fatty acids, so important, because it does help the brain and it helps the heart. The nuts that we sort of think of as having the most omega-3 fatty acids are walnuts and almonds. But in the Mediterranean diet, there's hazelnuts, cashews, pistachios, peanuts, pine nuts, and all of those are also healthy. Good.
How many can you have?
Okay, see, I have it right here on my little purple card. Remember that nuts have a lot of oil, and it is oil, whether it's beneficial oil or not beneficial. So you need to limit it because it's got a fair number of calories. So usually we say a handful, and whether you want to cook it or you want to eat it raw, you want to limit it to about a handful. And it's a good snack. So if you're going to work out downstairs, then nuts are a good option for a snack after that. Okay. Seeds, similar to nuts, again, a big part of the Mediterranean diet. Again, they do have oil, and so you need to limit it. And like nuts, you want to have the kind that are unsalted and not the honey roasted and those sorts of things, which tastes a lot better, right? But tahini, which is ground sesame seed, that's a big part of the Mediterranean diet. Sunflower seeds, especially unsalted, is another good fiber. And some people think that the lignans, which is something that we think or we hope, it's being studied right now, whether it lowers the incidence and the recurrence of breast cancer, that's being studied, and that's in flaxseed. So it's reasonable to grind some flaxseed and have that. Unfortunately, flaxseed oil does not have the same content of lignin, so you really want to do ground flaxseed. Okay. So now we're getting to the meat portion. I'm sorry, go ahead. It depends. If it's regular flaxseed, if you buy, because most of the time you have to get it in a health food store, you have to get it somewhere to get the flaxseed, but you do have to grind it to get the lignans that we think are the beneficial properties. You do have to grind it. And if you get flaxseed oil, unless it's been supplemented with the lignans, it doesn't have a lot of, and there's other things. Flaxseed oil has ALA, which is a type of omega-3 fatty acids, but only about 5% of that is converted to omega-3 fatty acids, so I think it's just better to get the omega-3 fatty acids. But the flaxseed, when it's ground, that has lignans, which you can't get in other kinds of food. Okay.
With a flaxseed meal, if you're not one who wants to sit around baking, what types of foods do you add it to?
You can add it to anything. My mom adds it to oatmeal and salads. So yogurts, smoothies, any of those kinds of things, because it doesn't have a lot of taste, But what you want to do is you want to kind of grind it and then use it pretty quickly, because it can go rancid. So, but I think it's a really important, and again, it's a good source of fiber as well. Okay, so now we're moving on to fish. How did everybody enjoy their red snapper? Good. Okay, good. So I hope the chef heard that. So fish is really an integral part of the Mediterranean diet. And on the island of Crete, when Dr. Keyes studied this, they were eating at least twice a week of different kinds of fish. So fish provides lean protein. That's sort of the most beneficial part of it, any kind of fish. But if you want to get the most antioxidants and you want to get the most benefit, you want to have some of the fattier fish, which have, again, omega-3 fatty acids. So they have the kind that help the heart and help the brain. And those are, and we've heard about those. They're salmon and herring, sardines, halibut, right, exactly, black cod, and snapper has a fair amount of omega-3 fatty acids. Tuna is another and albacore tuna actually has a fair amount of omega-3 fatty acids, so that's a really easy way, as long as you get the kind that's not packed in oil. Anchovies has a fair amount, sure. So anchovies and sardines, and sardines also have a very high calcium content, and if you eat the anchovies with some of the little bones, it actually has a lot of calcium. So those are super healthy things. And if you make it in a dressing or something, you're not going to taste sort of that fishy kind of flavor that people don't like. Okay, so what are the benefits of omega-3 fatty acids? We know, first, if you look on the internet, it like supposed to do everything. But, I can really only talk to you about what studies show that it improves. And so we know that omega-3 fatty acids reduces the risk of heart attacks. Some studies show stroke, but in general, any kind of cardiovascular disease. You will read a lot that omega-3 fatty acids lower your cholesterol, and actually that's not correct. So it actually increases, just very modestly, it actually increases your bad cholesterol, but it also modestly increases your good cholesterol, so that's important. And the real key is that it decreases triglycerides. So especially if you're diabetic, people who are diabetic tend to have very high triglyceride levels, so it lowers the triglyceride levels, which is very beneficial, and it reduces the risk of what we call sudden death, which typically is from some kind of lethal heart rhythm, and it reduces platelet stickiness, so you have less chance of clotting. But if you're on blood thinners, make sure you talk to your doctor about how much omega-3 fatty acids that you should have. But in general, even if you're on a very strong blood thinner, you could have omega-3 fatty acids because of all the beneficial effects of those. Okay. So we talked about the sources. One caveat I try to recommend, there's certain kinds of fish that I try to have you not eat, and those are sort of the predators, the ones who are at the top of the food chain. Even though things like shark actually has a lot of omega-3 fatty acids because they've eaten all the fish before them, it has a pretty high mercury content. So a lot of the pollutants that we don't want in our body. So tilefish and shark are the things that I usually suggest you stay away from.
What about the bottom feeders, like the crab and mussels and so on?
A lot of those, including shrimp and crab and shellfish, actually has a fair amount of omega-3 fatty acids. I think as long as you either steam or saute or boil them. So you lose the benefits when you fry them. Okay, that's really important. Okay, so the question is about grouper. So in this region, of course, when you go to a restaurant, you get grouper, mahi, and tilapia, right? So all of those, they're really good sources of lean protein, but they don't have a lot of omega-3 fatty acids. But again, if you were just thinking about the health benefits, they're still healthier than, say, eating red meat. Okay. All right. So we talked about, a minute ago, I talked about how beans and legumes are super healthy for us. They have a lot of fiber, they have a lot of amino acids and iron, but they're not a complete protein. So the things that we think of as being complete proteins, meaning they have some of those amino acids that we have to have in our diet in order to make all the protein and all the things in our body, and those are eggs. So eggs are considered a complete protein, and then of course meat. The issue with eggs, and I get asked this all the time, how many eggs are safe? And it sort of goes in waves, in the medical community, sometimes like eggs are in fashion, sometimes they're not. But typically what we say is no more than 1 egg yolk a week. But you can have a limitless supply of egg whites. So it's really, and the reason for the egg yolk is because of the saturated fats that are in the egg yolk. So, I forgot to ask now, is there anybody named Polly here? Polly? Mona? Usually there's at least one. Because, saturated fats, people get very, very confused. This is a little bit of an aside. Confused about what is saturated fats, what's unsaturated fats, what are trans fats, what are polyunsaturated fats, what are monounsaturated fats. So the way that I remember it is that Mona, and usually there's a person named Mona that I have stand up, and you'll always remember that. So Mona and polyunsaturated, those are the good ones. And then the trans fat and the saturated fats are the ones that you don't want to have. And if you look on the American Heart Association website, they have the fat brothers, and they're called the trans and the sat fats, and they're called heartbreakers because they're bad for you. But poly and monounsaturated, you have to remember, are good. And trans fat, it's a little bit deceptive because every single thing that I see now says no trans fat on it, or no saturated fats. Saturated fats typically are fats that are in animal proteins. So if you're going to have oatmeal, it's not going to have saturated fats because I hope there's no animal products in it, you know. But there are some vegetable kinds of saturated fats, and those are the tropical oils. So the palm oils and the coconut oils, those are the ones that you want to try to stay away from. And then those vegetable oils that start out so good, you know, the sunflower oil, the safflower oil, the canola oil. When you do this process called either hydrogenating or partially hydrogenating it, and it's a chemical process. Typically, it's done so that it stabilizes the food product and makes it taste better. And that's so when you take sort of a good product and you make it into a bad product, sort of like this. You know, like your child gone wayward, you know, I don't know how else to explain it. So you think of it as a process that you do starting out with a regular liquid vegetable oil, you know, and I'm going to make fun of my mom because she's okay with this. Because the other thing that she liked to use was Crisco. Wasn't that, now do you all remember when we used to have Crisco in our, right, so, and you can see how handy that is because it's not going to go bad, it's not going to get rancid, but unfortunately that has a lot of saturated fats and it has a lot of trans fat. So that's what you want to avoid. Okay, I'm sorry. Pickles and relish. You know, again, I think in moderation, you have to really be careful. Now, if you want to make your own pickles and relish, which most of us don't do, you know, then it's healthy. You have to be careful of all the additives. But what I would recommend, so if you wanted to have kind of a condiment, so olives would be a good condiment, capers are good, vinegars are fine, but you want to stay away from some of the, this isn't part of the Mediterranean diet, but things that are like, that are sort of fermented, so like kimchi and those kinds of things, those have a fair amount of carcinogens. So you have to just be careful about what it is, okay? All right, we talked about eggs. If you can get the DHA-enriched eggs, that's helpful. And again, DHA is the kind of fish oil that we think, or the omega-3 fatty acids that we think are good, especially for the brain. Okay. You can get them in a grocery store, yeah. Okay. And so the other really important component, this is sort of a misconception that people have, is dairy. You know, there's a lot of controversy in different kinds of diets about dairy. So the Mediterranean diet has lots of low or non-fat dairy. So you have to be careful with the fat content because, again, it does have saturated fats. But things like feta cheese and Greek yogurt, ricotta cheese, all of those are really, really good sources of calcium. And, of course, for women, they're really important for bone health. So it is something that I recommend that you have. And even some of the soft cheeses, you know, I mean, things like brie and Parmesan and all those things that taste so good, you know, they're still healthier, again, than, you know, if you were to have Cocoa Puffs. So we'll go back to Cocoa Puffs, okay? Another important part of the Mediterranean diet, and you can see there's those salt shakers on your table. So in this country, especially in restaurants, we use a lot of salt, and in the Mediterranean countries, they tend to use herbs. And there's certain herbs that have a lot of beneficial properties. You know, and when I was growing up, I never wanted to eat the Indian food that my mom would make. You know, I didn't want that turmeric, and I didn't want that ginger, and I wanted to have, you know, like Coca-Cola and, you know, mac and cheese and all the things that my friends were eating. But really, we know that now when you go back to those herbs, that they are really healthy. And the ones in the Mediterranean diet that we talk about a lot are thyme, oregano, parsley. Parsley is more than just that little thing that you know, have as sort of decoration, yeah, garnish. And parsley, so parsley and rosemary are probably the two that you really want to think about using. And we talked about lemon, so that's another way. If you wanted to have a condiment and you put it in lemon or vinegar, all of those are very helpful. And we talked about how lemon, remember, it increases the iron absorption in our diet. Lime is as well, right? It's just that we sort of think of lemon as being in the Mediterranean countries, but any citrus, so any, whether it's grapefruit, lime, lemon, oranges, all of those are good sources. What about basil? I'm sorry, basil. You said basil, is that right? Basil. Okay, yeah. So basil is, again, a good, it has a good flavor. It is a good seasoning. It doesn't have sort of the beneficial kinds of things that you think about with oregano and rosemary, but it's an important part of the Mediterranean diet. And here we had the walnut pesto, so the basil and the walnut, which I think is healthier even than the pine nuts that you can use. So again, we're really splitting hairs, because if you're eating basil instead of oregano, I'm like happy. So
If you can't get fresh herbs, dried ones good?
the dried ones, you just have to be careful how long you keep them. I have some from like 1969, and they're probably not that good. So if you rotate them out frequently, that's fine. And I think it is really hard to have a supply, unless you're growing them yourself, to have a lot of herbs. And you just have to use, if you have dried, you just use a smaller amount, and you want to, sort of, I don't know what you call it, you kind of squeeze them so that you get all the oils and everything out into your food. The one kind of herb that I haven't talked about, which is garlic, right? So garlic is a big, important part of the Mediterranean diet, and it's super healthy. And right after World War II is actually called sort of the Russian penicillin, because we know that it has some antibacterial properties. And when I was doing my residency at Duke, I came down from Wisconsin, so when I saw these people who would come to the hospital, and they would come, they'd come barefoot, and they were tobacco workers, and they had these poultices, and they all had their own poultices, and I just thought this was fascinating, because of course I wanted to, put them on my IV antibiotics, so I didn't want to use any poultices, but really if you put something like garlic in a poultice, it actually does have antibacterial effects, so it is really something that that has valuable properties. And then the other things that you think about is that it stabilizes blood sugar, and most importantly, it can lower your blood pressure. So it's really good, again, for your blood pressure, lowers the risk of heart disease and stroke for that reason. So the key with...
I'm Italian, and I use a lot of garlic, but the only trouble with it is that you have this awful smell afterwards. And how much are you supposed to have?
I see people having huge amounts of garlic, and you can't really do that because it's not a vegetable. It's an herb that you use. A lot of people, what they will do is they will cook it in or saute it in olive oil and then remove it if you don't want that really significant garlic flavor. People always ask me, can you get like garlic pills? We don't really know if those are beneficial or not. So I guess for people who really don't like garlic at all, it's not unreasonable to try something like that. But the key with garlic, so if you want to have just a small amount in your diet, so then you've got to do something with it to make it, to get the properties that you want. And the key is you have to cut it first, so you have to mince it or cut it or do something so typically you wouldn't have it whole. And then the other thing is when you cut it, leave it out for 10 minutes because that really promotes the allium, the properties that we want. So don't put it in your saute pan right away, okay? Again, it still has the same properties, but typically roasted garlic would be left whole. So it's better if you can cut it. But a lot of people like that sort of mellow sort of flavor of roasted garlic, and that's fine. Again, we're like nitpicking. But I think that, we're all like sort of, in America, we're all like type A people, so we want to like have the best we can. And so if you wanted to have the best properties from garlic, you would cut it, you would mince it, and you would leave it out for 10 minutes before you cook it.
What about the crushed garlic that you buy in a jar?
As far as I know, I haven't seen any studies on that, but I think that it's pretty healthy. I think, if you taste it, it doesn't have the same flavor as if you make your own garlic, and I think that probably real Italians would probably turn over in their grave, but I don't know. But, Sure. And you want to cook it slowly. You don't want to cook it too long because, garlic, when you cook it too long or you burn it, it really tastes bitter. So you want to put it in last. You don't want to put it in as one of your first ingredients. But I think that there's things that you could do to make it palatable. Go ahead.
Hi. I have to cook gluten-free.
Uh-huh.
Okay. What do you think of Ezekiel bread?
Again, these are one of these things that haven't been studied well. I think if you're on a strict gluten-free diet...
Well, that's not gluten-free, but the Ezekiel bread is made from all
sprouts, apparently.
Okay, so I'm thinking of something different then. I'm not really familiar with Ezekiel bread. What I'm thinking about is a lot of the, I'm not sure what they are, but you'll see things that say gluten-free, that you're not sure what the flour is made out of. But the things to stick with, if you want to have a whole grain, I'm assuming you want to have a whole grain, so you want to have buckwheat. You can have soba noodles, which again isn't really part of the Mediterranean diet, but and any kind of rice. So whether it is brown rice or basmati rice, all of those are really good sources. And then again, buckwheat, because even though it says, even it's not really a wheat, so you can still have it. But then yet when you want to avoid things like corn and some of the other things. Okay? All right. Sweets. Okay, so sweets are not a big part of the Mediterranean diet. You can see that on my diagram, it's right at the top. But it's not that you can't have any sweets. The key is in the Mediterranean diet, the sweets, number one, the portion sizes are small, and you have them with natural sugars like honey. So, and actually, I'm just telling you what the recommendations are, which is no more than twice a week, and typically you say about 75 calories or less. Yeah. So dark chocolate would be a good choice, and some people advocate that you can have dark chocolate, especially if it doesn't have a lot of sugar. You can have dark chocolate even every day. You want to have chocolate that's at least 70% cocoa, and you want to get the one that says, you don't want to get the Dutch, because when you do that Dutch process, then it removes a lot of the positive antioxidant properties. Okay. So the other thing that you see on your diagram that there isn't a lot of, and that's red meat. We've talked about fish. You can have lean poultry, but there isn't a lot of red meat. It doesn't mean you can't have any red meat if you really want to follow the Mediterranean diet, but typically we say no more than about twice a month. And again, you want to have it as lean as possible. So you can see how this is so different compared to what we normally are used to eating. Okay. Now, so I haven't heard anybody ask me about red wine. Usually that's the first question I get, right? Usually, everybody wants to go out and get some red wine. So one, if you don't drink alcohol, it doesn't mean that you have to go out and add that to your diet. But if you are somebody who drinks wine, typically you're going to get more beneficial properties if you have red wine. And resveratrol, which is the antioxidant, or we think the antioxidant that's so beneficial in red wine, it's really in the skins of the grapes. So you want to have something that has a lot of that. If you have red grapes or purple grapes, that has a lot of resveratrol. So you get the same benefits. If you want to have 100% red grape juice, a glass of that, you don't probably want to have more than that. Again, that's a really good, and that's equivalent of having a glass of red wine. So you don't have to drink red wine in order to do that. The other thing is that the recommendation for women is no more than 5 ounces a day. So if you have more than 5 ounces, you sort of lose the benefit. In men, it's 10 ounces. And that's for men under the age of 65. It decreases. I know there's a lot of, it's not as easy as you would think. The other thing that you have to remember is, there's a lot of negative parts of alcohol. So if you wanted to have the benefits of resveratrol, there's other ways that you could do it. And I would recommend having grapes and red grape juice. Those are both equivalent. Okay. Red grapes, yes. So red and purple grapes. So those are really, so again, green grapes they're just like bananas. I mean, they're a great fruit, but they just don't have a lot of the antioxidant properties that you would think about. And of course, you don't want to peel your grapes, which I don't think you are doing anyway. The final part that you see on the base of the diet, which is exercise, that is really important. So, people in European countries do a lot more walking than we do, and so they have more of an active lifestyle. Usually we recommend 30 minutes of exercise a day, whatever it is that you like. And then the last part of the Mediterranean diet that I think is really important is what you're doing here, which is you're socializing, you're enjoying it with friends and family. It looks like grease out there. You know, I mean, so that's a part of like enjoying life, having zest for life, and that is also something that's been shown to be beneficial in the Mediterranean diet. All right. So the one thing that I think is concerning is that, you know, the Mediterranean diet is changing. So if you see photographs of downtown Rome, you see a lot more fast food restaurants. So the Mediterranean diet is sort of becoming the American McDonald's diet. But you want to, when you think about the Mediterranean diet, you really want to think about the classic kinds of things that we've spoken about today. And again, you don't have to make it like dogma. The one thing that if you can get out of this talk, so normally, you know, you're told when you speak that you should make one important point, and the one important point that you should have is that eating whole foods, so whether it's bananas or it's grapes or it's red wine, if you can eat whole foods rather than processed foods, things that come out of boxes, if you can avoid those, that's the most important thing. You can't really go wrong but it's hard for us. You know, I mean, everybody's busy and it's hard to be making whole foods. It's hard with people's tastes and things like that. But people will tell you that when they start eating this way, it's really hard to go back to that old way of eating, right? Okay. Are there any other questions? Do we answer everything?
Seems to be a lot of controversy as to the type of nuts. One day you should be eating walnuts, the next day it's almonds. So what's the difference?
Yeah. Well, you know, walnuts and almonds supposedly have the highest antioxidant properties, meaning they have the most omega-3 fatty acids. But pistachios, cashews, peanuts, all of those are fine as long as you get, especially if you get them unsalted, if you don't have them sort of sugar-coated or with a lot of coating and things, I think it's fine. And if you limit it to a handful, that's really all. I think it's perfectly fine. If you're not somebody who likes almonds, then, you know, have the kind that you like. Okay?
Are nuts better when they're raw?
I think in general they are, just because you are adding, when you cook them in any way, you are adding some oil. So but a lot of people don't like raw nuts. That's the problem. So if you have to have them, you want to have the least amount of oil added as possible. Any other questions? Well, thank you for being so attentive. Before I go, I'm going to introduce Kim Miller, who is going to talk about her program with the Mediterranean diet, which I think you're going to be very interested in. She'll outline that.
I was wondering if you're going to put your presentation on your website or something?
Well, I am videotaping it, and I hope he's going to edit out the parts where I drop the cards. But it is going to be, so my YouTube channel is called VEEMD, and my website is www.vmd.wordpress.com, and it's right on there. So all of, actually what I talked about today is already on there, so you don't have to take notes. You can just, and if you have any questions or you have any ideas of what you'd like me to talk about, I've got a lot of ideas from some of the questions that I've had today.
You didn't mention anything about coffee. Is that okay?
Coffee, actually most of the studies, believe it or not, as long as you limit it to under 4 cups of coffee a day, which most people do, actually are very, very beneficial. Some people argue that coffee decreases the absorption of calcium and causes bone loss, but in general we think that coffee is healthy. If you're going to have decaf coffee, you want to get the kind that isn't fermented with, I mean, there's a process, but it's very hard to find the kind of decaf coffee. So I'd rather have you have full calf coffee because I think it is healthier. And then, of course, tea. So tea isn't a big part of the Mediterranean diet, but tea is healthy. And white tea has the most antioxidant properties. Green tea has the second most. And then the kind of tea that we think about, the sort of the Lipton tea bags, have the least amount, but again, they still have very beneficial properties. So coffee and tea I don't have a problem with. Okay? All right. Let me give it to Kim. Thank